We are so happy to have you all join us today at the Northern Virginia Affordable Housing Alliance's 2025 Virginia Post-Election Housing Outlook. We are doing this session today in partnership with Virginia Housing Alliance, and I'm thrilled that both Brian Koziel, the executive director, and Isabel McLean, the director of policy and advocacy from Virginia Housing Alliance, who are our statewide partners, who advocate for the expansion of housing opportunities and ending homelessness throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. As many of you know, VHA is an incredible partner. We really lean on them to do the heavy lifting at the statewide level. So we thought it would be appropriate to invite them here today as we meet with our guests. Many of you who RSVP'd might have seen that we had also planned to have Delegate Adele McClure from Arlington County here with us, but unfortunately she had a family emergency and is not able to join us today. But we are excited to have Delegate Marcus Simon, who's serving the 13th District, which serves part of Fairfax County and the city of Falls Church with us. He serves on the General Laws Committee and is the chair of the Housing and Consumer Protection Subcommittee. So he plays a really important role in the General Assembly for us, and of course, going into next year as well. And then we also have Senator Kanan Srinivasan serving the 32nd District, which serves parts of Loudoun County. So thank you, Senator, for joining us too. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Delegate Marcus Simon to kind of give us an overview about his thoughts about what he anticipates in next year's General Assembly. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you again for having me, and thank you to the Virginia Housing Alliance and Northern Virginia Affordable Housing Alliance for being on today or putting this event on. I see that we still have members pouring in. It looks like we're going to get up to 100 or so folks, which is, again, for the Monday before Thanksgiving. This is a week that a lot of folks take off or are off to another thing. So clearly this is an important issue that you guys have taken some time out of your day to come learn about and share your thoughts on. So I'm excited about that. As you guys just heard, I am the chairman of the Housing Subcommittee of the Virginia General Laws Committee. So we try and get all the housing stuff. Some goes through county, cities, and towns. Some landlord-tenant things will go through the Civil Subcommittee of our Courts of Justice. I chair the Civil Subcommittee of Courts of Justice as well. I'm working on trying to corner the market on housing stuff, as Isabel knows, and some of the other folks that are here. And I think it's going to be an exciting year for a lot of our priorities. I mean, from the first place to start is we look at this list of over 400 bills over the last 2 years that Governor Youngkin has vetoed. And that's sort of our starting point. Like, well, these are things that the General Assembly has already said are priorities that we've fleshed out bills. They've gone through our subcommittee and committee process. They've been vetted. We've heard from all the stakeholders. We thought they were good ideas, good enough that we passed them with majorities, and the governor happened to veto them. So I think we'll see some of those things. I think you see that. So the House of Delegates, the Democratic caucus, just released its initial list of bills. We had 6 bills that were sort of our day one bills. I guess usually it's a top 5, but we were so excited about our new majority, I think we couldn't stop at 5, so we have 6. But HB 4 is a bill that many of you probably have seen before. It's from Elizabeth Bennett Parker, and it has to do with preserving existing affordable housing, right? In places like Alexandria and Arlington, you've got some affordable housing projects that were built with low-income housing tax credits and other other devices and methods to keep them affordable. And those things are starting to expire, and the properties are getting ready to turn over. And so what this bill does is it creates a right of first refusal for a locality. So if Alexandria says, hey, listen, we like this affordable housing project. We don't want the developers to now sell it for full market rate or to be torn down and McMansions put up in their place. The locality can say, listen, we're going to step in, or a nonprofit that we create or our designee can step in and match any offer you get for the property. So the owner doesn't lose the value of the property, but the locality says, look, it's an important public policy for us to maintain this as affordable housing. So that's, again, in our list of our top 5 or 6 bills that we put in, sort of setting the tone, I think, for what you'll see. I've spoken with I need the glasses to read, even though I don't like the lights reflecting on me. So sorry about that. I gotta get some non-reflective lenses for the future. Anyway, I'm distracted by looking at my own picture, so I should stop and just keep going with what I'm saying. Um, so that sort of sets the tone. It's a priority item. I've had conversations with the Spanberger policy folks really starting this summer. I probably shouldn't say that because we don't want to look like she was overconfident, but I do think folks were able to read the tea leaves, and I think it was important to Governor-elect Spanberger to given where she was in the polls to be able to hit the ground running. And one of the things we see with new administrations a lot is that first session is a real learning process for a new governor, particularly somebody who hasn't spent a lot of time in state level government. They're still learning their way around Richmond and who does what and where all the where everything goes and how to get from A to B. And I think that Abigail, having been a former legislator herself, understood the importance of being ready on day one to start to accomplish some things that we know that people are expecting from her administration, from our trifecta. So we've had conversations about housing and housing policy and affordability already. And I think what you're going to see is an emphasis on an area where there's some pretty good bipartisan, and not even bipartisan, but philosophical consensus, right? I think conservatives and progressives, Democrats and Republicans, all kind of agree that one approach that we all like is increasing the supply of housing, right? We can increase affordability by making more housing available to everyone and more affordable housing units, you're getting them online, faster with fewer barriers to entry. And I think that, again, very few people disagree with that concept, right? I think conservatives, the Americans for Prosperity, they like the idea of reducing the regulatory burden on landowners and developers, getting more housing built. They sort of think the market will just take care of it itself if we just sort of flood the market with houses. I don't know that I agree 100% with that philosophy. I do think that we need to be intentional about it and work on tying some of the incentives for greater density and other things to a commitment to maintaining housing that's going to be affordable for all kinds of people and everyone who lives in the community. And to the idea that you ought to be able to, if you're a nurse, a firefighter, a police officer, a teacher's assistant, you ought to be able to afford to live in a home that's in the community that you serve, that you work in, that you make your living in. So to that end, we've got some bills that'll probably work on shortening the time frame for approval of developments. I had a bill I put in last year to just on one piece of the process, just site plans, right? This is after we've already zoned the property for housing, after it's already been planned, after everybody knows this is the amount of density that we want there. It would still take sometimes 2 or 3 more years of site plan reviews, like literally where are the curb cuts going to be? What are the buildings going to look like? What's the layout going to be? Kind of micromanaging the process. And so we've sort of said, listen, when it's done, we've established the projects going there. We don't want the planning commission and political leaders micromanaging every step of the process. We're going to make more of that administrative. It's really just either you meet the criteria or you don't. It should be a check-a-box kind of an application, and we can move that through quicker. So that bill passed and was signed by the governor last year. One of the other things that bill did was task the code commission with going through the code and looking for other opportunities, not just at the site plan stage, but throughout the planning and land development stage, to look for opportunities to shorten the time frame, consolidate consecutive steps into concurrent steps so that you can get multiple things going at the same time, and other places to take time out of the process, because time is money. I mean, I know it's a cliche, but it adds to the cost of bringing these housing units online. And so the quicker we can get things done, the less overhead there is, and we have a crisis right now. We need housing more quickly. All that said, with all that sense of urgency, the working group at the Code Commission said we need another year. So they made a lot of progress on identifying those things. So we'll have a bill to continue their study for a year. I mean, one of the reasons it's taking longer is there is still a commitment to working as best we can with localities, right? I think there's a temptation to just sort of run over the localities to say, hey, local governments, you're the problem, we're the solution, get out of the way. I think right now, I don't think folks are quite ready to go that far. We want to continue in partnership with the localities. The other thing is localities find workarounds. I mean, if we change the rules over here, they will find a way to call it something else and put the brakes on it if they feel like they're being bullied too much. And so I think there's still a commitment to working with localities so they share our sense of urgency and create a sense of urgency and get them moving along with us on things like that. Um, as for existing housing stock, I think you're going to see a more tenant-friendly environment. Probably not to the degree that you've seen in New York City. I don't know that anybody's talking about freezing rents in Virginia. So if that's your big issue, you're probably going to be disappointed. But we will have some things that will make the tenant application process more transparent and more objective. And we had bills last year, to make the criminal background check uniform, so that everybody was working off the same page on that. That was vetoed by the governor. We've got a bill that will a lot of work on trying to prevent foreclosures. Right, one of the ways to keep folks in affordable housing is to just let them stay in the houses where they are and give them opportunities to stay there even when they start to fall behind on their rent. And so one small thing we did that actually was very effective during the pandemic but expired was in Virginia, landlords only have to give you 5 days notice to pay or quit before they can begin eviction proceedings. A lot of times what's happening with folks is they're behind on the rent is they're waiting for that next paycheck to hit. And if they're paid biweekly or on a every other month process, expanding that from 5 days to 14 days notice to pay or quit can actually make a big difference for a lot of folks. They get the money they need in hand to get caught up. And so we've had bills again for the last several years to make that 15 or 14-day pay or quit permanent. I think that'll pass this year and will be signed by the governor. So that will be a helpful piece on the landlord tenant side of things. We've seen some bills that are going to be a little more aggressive. It sort of remains to see how those are going to be going as far as setting housing targets for localities and saying, hey, listen, you guys are free as localities to control your land use and decide how much housing you want to have until you don't, right? And if you essentially demonstrate an unwillingness to approve housing that's sufficient to house your population in an affordable way, then the state's going to step in and override some of your decision-making powers and give you certain housing targets to go forward. Whether that bill passes as introduced or not, or whether we have to make some tweaks to it to have it work in a way that is effective. But there are some concerns that some folks have about sprawl, essentially. In other words, I don't know that we want Clark County to be paved over with houses or not. Could they trade some of that density into closer in parts? Does Loudoun County, which has a big master land use plan, and kind of can talk about this, of keeping their density to the east and keeping their western part of the county a little more rural, do we want to override that for the sake of just building more houses everywhere, or do we want to be, again, a little more targeted about it? To that end, again, I think you'll see some progress on encouraging affordable dwelling units near metro stations and near mass transit, and creating incentives for folks and localities encouraging localities to plan their density around their transit so that, again, they're affordable, but also, attainable, right? So that folks that maybe don't have two cars and the ability to drive hours and hours to get to their jobs can find affordable housing adjacent to transit so that they can get to their jobs and things from where they live. So I think we'll see some of those things happen this session as well. I was worried about filling my 10 minutes. I'm probably going over already. I'm happy to listen to some folks on questions and answers too. I know one of the other things is in the assisted living, the elderly housing area, and where we have assisted living things. One of the things the Northern Virginia Aging Network, who I think shares this priority with the Northern Virginia Affordable Housing Network, asked for was a study of what kind of housing options are available as far as assisted living and for elder housing. I think I'm going to skip legislation on that. I'm on the studies subcommittee of the JLARC, of Joint Legislative Audit and Review Committee, and I think I've already got that study worked into their work plan for 2026. Sometimes we need legislation to order JLARC to study something. Sometimes we can take up studies on our own. In any event, we may need legislation to complement that to set deadlines and stuff. But I think we definitely want to take a closer look at that. I think we need to consider, again, all housing types and all various demographic groups that all have opportunities to stay in their communities and live there. And I guess I know a big topic that a great concern to everybody is a big priority of everybody is faith in housing, right? And yes, in God's backyard. I know that that's one that I'd like to say a consensus is growing up around, but I think everybody agrees that something needs to be done. I think there's going to be a question of degree and how much of that bill gets through in its exact form and whether we do it in stages. I'm a supporter of it. Um, as chair of the subcommittee, I'm cautious about co-sponsoring or sponsoring legislation that's not my idea in particular, just because there often needs to be some compromise. I like to try and get where we can consensus. I haven't yet heard the other side. I feel pretty good about your side of the argument. I do want to leave some space for the other side to be heard and see if there might be some things we need to compromise on. So when I sit in that position as chair of the subcommittee, I try and see myself a little. Obviously, I have an interest and I have political desires, but I also want to remain a little bit objective so I can be a fair dealer with everybody, all the stakeholders, and make sure that everybody feels like they've been heard properly on that. But I feel very good about that legislation's prospects of getting through this session. And with that, that's sort of where I see things. Again, a big consensus around supply side, increasing supply. I think some consumer protection, some tenant protection stuff, getting a little more tenant friendly going forward is likely to happen. I do think we're going to see, finally, I guess, the fiscal situation. It's hard. I know we'd all like to have more money in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. I know we'd all like to have more money to spend to assist localities in acquiring properties. And we give them a right of first refusal, which is very little good if they can't afford to purchase the property, if they don't have a source of funds for it. And so that's going to be a priority, but it's going to be one of a number of competing priorities, given the impact that the changes in the federal government and DOGE and the shutdown and other things have had on Virginia's economy and revenue picture. Yeah, unfortunately, unlike the federal government, we can't just keep printing more money. We can't spend in deficits. We have to balance our budget every time. We've got to try and match our outgoing to what comes in. And with less money coming in, it's going to be trickier to do that. So it's a high priority, but again, it's competing with things like replacing Medicaid funding, replacing SNAP benefits that are going away. We've got education. Jay Lark it says we've been underfunding K through 12 education for decades. And so there's a lot of stuff that we need to make up on. But I think I guess I'd close by saying, we put our money where our mouth is. You've seen our top 6 priorities for the House Democratic Caucus. Housing is right up there in our top 5 or 6 things that we need to address. And I look forward to playing a role in moving the ball forward on those. I know that sounds a little cliche, but I think, Governor Spanberger really wants some takeaways, not just incremental progress, but some things to say, hey, here's how we've heard our constituents, here's how we've made housing more affordable, here's how we've improved the lives of Virginians, particularly those who are struggling with paying the rent or paying for their housing costs. And so I hope we have some tangible results for folks at the end of the session.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Delegate Simon. And thank you. We really appreciate your leadership on this issue and really being on top of everything that's happening. I think it's good for us to kind of get a sense of what to expect next session, which is coming quickly. And just want to say for those who just joined us, please feel free to put questions in the chat. We're going to hear from Senator next, but then we'll hear from VHA with their policy priorities. For next year's General Assembly, and then we'll have a moderated Q&A after that. So just wanted to set the agenda for everybody. So again, thank you, Delegate Simon. We know you have to leave a little early, but I'm sure we'll get to the Q&A before you have to go. So right now I'd like to welcome Senator Kannan Sirvasan, who represents Loudoun County. We're so grateful for you to be here with us today, and I will just turn it over to you for you to give your overview of what you expect next session. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful to be here. Thank you, Jill. Thanks to Delegate Marcus Simon. I mean, he gave an amazing overview of basically the lay of the land, and I agree with all the things that he said. I'm just going to go a little bit, specifics about what I'm thinking, what I'm planning for the next session, what has been the discussion, and first and foremost, I thank you all, the NVAHA group. I'm grateful for you for putting this together. This is what makes a difference ultimately. Ultimately, what is going to make the difference is your advocacy and your, speaking out loud and clear about this issue. Sessions, as we all know, can be very quick. I've done 2 sessions, 24 in the House of Delegates and 25 in the Senate. They go really fast. There's so many bills. Meetings like this, discussions, and the conversation that we are having pre-session is extremely important. So one thing I want to say has been very clear from the results of the recent election is affordability is a big issue. I mean, I can safely say that affordability was the number one issue, that helped the race. And Governor-elect Spanberger was laser focused. Her team was laser focused, and I think she will be laser focused on that when she takes oath come January. And housing is the top of that affordability crisis. Um, Delegate Simon talked about a couple of key issues, and I just want to highlight that it is across the Commonwealth. It is not just in my county, Loudoun, where I've lived since '99. It's not just in Northern Virginia. It's everywhere you go. You keep hearing this, and that is why it was so wonderful to see the recent campaign focus on affordability and housing being one of those. I mean, I recently read, and you all probably know this, that there are jurisdictions in the country that have built cities that have built more housing than the entire Commonwealth last year. So I mean, you see that data, and you're like, okay, what should we do? What can we do, right? And I think this will be a big one. This session, we obviously have a big responsibility to work on this, and we just heard Delegate Simon give a wonderful overview. I think there will be a lot of that coming up in all seriousness. I also want to say that there is clearly bipartisan movement on this, and there will be some nuances based on their district and some local considerations, which is fair. But I think there is clearly a bipartisan view that this is a crisis that we need to address, boldly. Um, One of the things that I am very focused on is transparency. I have a bill in mind that I'm working on to bring more transparency on approval timelines so that there is clear database across the Commonwealth to see, how long does it take to get a project approved, different type of projects. And yeah, as you may remember, Jill, in 2024, when I was in the House, I did an accessory dwelling unit bill. Senator Saddam Salim did it in the Senate side. Now we both are in the Senate, so I'm trying to work with him and also Delegate Laura Cohen on the House side to see what we can do on that. There's a lot of learning for me because that was my first session in the General Assembly, but I think that gives an option. And of course, like Delegate Simon said earlier, I believe big time in being collaborative with the local governments. I sit in the local government committee in the Senate. As I said, I've lived in Loudoun since '99. I think it's extremely important to work collaboratively with the local government. The intent is not to take or hurt their power, but the intent is to see where we can collaborate, how we can collaborate, so that we can do this together because we all have the same goal. I know Loudoun has an affordable um, uh, uh, housing project fund. There's a housing trust fund across different parts of the Commonwealth. Like again, I just came back from 2 days of Senate finance meetings in Radford University. Delegate Simon was absolutely right on the money. We have, there will be competing priorities, coming up in January because of all the macroeconomic factors that we have no choice other than to deal with and to prioritize. But I think there will be some creative thinking, there will be some creative working that will be going on to make sure that we do prioritize. I'm also proud to say last year in the session, last session 2025, I was proud to sponsor my SB 1351, which was Faith in Housing. I think we called it Yes in God's Backyard. So I'm very proud to support it again this year. I know that's being discussed. We had a meeting I think yesterday on it. There is some good traction on it. But again, we have to work together across all jurisdictions to make sure that we have a product that will move the needle and will make a difference. But ultimately, I think it comes down to all of our work, right? Our work as a legislator, your work as advocates, and I see a wonderful, group of people here, more than 100 people online, which is very, very, satisfying to see. It comes down to how do we make sure that we protect renters? How do we make sure that we protect homeowners? How do we make sure that we increase supply? And how do we make sure, and I'm going to emphasize this again, that we collaborate with the local governments, with the local jurisdictions, so that we are all working together as one team, because this is the number one, the top issue. I mean, this is one of the top three issues or four issues that the Virginians are facing, and it's our responsibility, and we are committed as a caucus to put this as a priority, work together between chambers and between local governments to make a meaningful difference this coming session. Again, thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to the moderator's questions.
Thank you so much, Senator. We're so grateful for your leadership and all the work you're doing on housing affordability. So now I'm going to turn it over to Isabel McLean, who's the Director of Policy and Advocacy with the Virginia Housing Alliance, and she's going to do a quick overview of VHA's priorities for next year. So Isabel, thank you and Brian for being here with us today.
Of course. Thank you for inviting us and working with us to put on this great event, so that folks have an opportunity to hear from their elected officials about plans for housing policy this next session. I won't take up a ton of time because I do know that there's some great questions that have already been asked in the chat and that were asked ahead of time when registered. So I want to make sure we can get to that. But I'll just briefly share some of the main things that the Virginia Housing Alliance is going to be taking the lead on next session. There are going to be plenty of housing related bills and initiatives that we're excited to look at and to support and work towards. But the main things that we as Virginia Housing Alliance are going to be leading on, our top priority is going to be responding to the environment we find ourselves now in due to cuts and threats to federal funding for housing assistance. Right now, the state provides about 10% of what we receive federally for funding for housing assistance. And so especially here in Virginia, when we're seeing threats to that funding, it can have a really big impact on the housing assistance programs we do have. Also, we need to be advocating for more than what we currently have in general. But especially with this context, we find ourselves in with some funding shortfalls, especially related to homeless services and funding for permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing. For those who may not be aware, very recently there were changes made to our main source of federal funding for homeless services, the Continuum of Care program, which will mean very significant losses in funding for existing permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing programs that serve over 3,000 people currently in Virginia. And so for us going into this session, we're going to be really calling on the General Assembly, which we understand is tough. There's a lot of other shortfalls that we're looking at federally due to changes that have been made by this administration. But we really believe, and I think what has also been stated already here, how incredibly foundational housing is to the well-being of Virginians, that this absolutely needs to be up top there. To address this funding shortfall for permanent supportive housing, to expand what resources that we do have here at the state, and also to expand what we have for rental assistance beyond as well. So this will be the third year that we've worked with many other advocates across housing and education, childhood development, etc., on the 5,000 Families campaign, which is our proposal for a state-funded rental assistance program. Again, we're looking at proposals and threats and conversations that would cut our federal rental assistance program or add more burdens and barriers to that program. And for many years, we've been arguing that the state needs to take responsibility to fill in the gap left behind by our federal program, but also improve upon it. And so especially now, we'll be calling on the General Assembly to set up a pilot for the state-funded rental assistance program. It would specifically be serving low-income families with school-aged and younger children in this initial pilot form. So we'll be making several budget asks, like I said, specifically to address these threats from the federal government, and also just push the needle for greater protections for people experiencing homelessness and housing instability. We're working on a bill with Delegate Cole that would push the needle on decriminalizing homelessness, trying to protect and ensure that people experiencing homelessness have free access to public spaces just as much as anyone else, that they are not targeted for existing in public spaces, that they are not seen as a danger, and really understanding that homelessness is not a choice. It's not something that can be solved by punishment, by civil or criminal penalties, but needs to be met with services. And then we're also going to be working on several bills to preserve affordable housing and increase the supply of affordable housing. Delegate Simon mentioned HB4 related to the preservation of affordable multifamily housing through a right of first refusal. That's one of VHA's top priorities that we're hoping to get across the finish line this year. We're also going to be working on a bill that would give localities more options when it comes to property tax abatements for affordable housing. Currently, there's not a clear authority for localities to be able to do that, but there is authority now to provide property tax abatements for properties owned by a nonprofit. We are going to offer a technical fix to that would include the complicated ownership structure of most affordable housing, which, through the low-income housing tax credit program, it's not always cut and dry that is owned by a nonprofit, but we're going to include language in there that can address that and still ensure that this property is owned by a nonprofit, but allow localities to be able to offer property tax abatements to reduce the burdens for operating and maintaining affordable housing moving forward. So I know I just went through a lot of information very quickly. I didn't want to take up a lot of time, but if you're interested in learning more, I'll put a link to our preliminary legislative agenda draft for next session, and you can follow our work on our website at Virginia or VAHousingAlliance.org. That's where we'll continue to post updates. We have a legislative tracker that we have publicly available that tracks all housing related bills during the General Assembly. I encourage you to check out. Hope that can be a resource to folks. But that's just a quick, speedy overview of what we've got. So I think that's all. Jill, shall we transition to questions now?
Yeah, that would be great. And thank you, Brian Koziel, Executive Director of VHA, for being here to help us with the Q&A. And thank you for the thoughtful questions that have already come in the chat. Please feel free to continue to add those, and we'll try to get through as many as we possibly can. So thank you, Brian, for your help with this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess we're going to enter speed round now. We've got about 40 questions to get through. So we're gonna see how far we get down this list. So someone asked in the chat, the problem with simply expanding housing is that it can result in gentrification of low wealth areas where many people find affordable housing in the marketplace. How can the state promote intentional redevelopment of older areas that will benefit existing residents rather than causing their displacement?
Yeah, that's a very tricky question, and that's one of the things I mentioned again. We need to be sort of intentional about it, and that's why we got to look for the right tools. And again, so I hate to express skepticism about Senator Van Valkenburg and Delegate Hummer's bill, but just saying the targets alone, I don't think is sufficient. I do think we need, and Senator Srinivasan and I were talking about working collaboratively with localities. But I'm for proposal again, like I think ADU ordinance. We have existing affordable dwelling, not accessory, but affordable dwelling unit ordinances that tie together development with a commitment to setting aside either market rate or specifically affordable housing units. And again, I think creating more incentives for localities to do that, creating more authority for them to do that. Certain localities have different kind of affordable dwelling unit authorities than others. I added the city of Falls Church to a list that had a more robust ability to require the inclusion of affordable dwellings in big developments. Why not have that ability available to everybody statewide? And so I think that's some of the ways we can do that. I share the concern, and again, I know I'm sort of speaking in platitudes here a little bit, but I do think that it's important that we. I think there's a carrot and stick approach to this, right? And I think we can provide carrots and say, hey, you want to build a great brand new 17-story high rise in Tyson's Corner? That's great. How many of those units are you willing to set aside for affordable housing in exchange for that? And I do think that we find that the experiment works really well. A lot of people are afraid that when we put affordable dwelling units amongst the others, that folks won't fit in, or they'll be stigmatized, or the units will look different. And the experience has been just the opposite, and it works really well for everybody. I'll
I,
trade you
I
my.
agree, Brian. I'm sorry, go ahead. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I agree with Billy Simon's point. I would just say Loudon has a ADU program, affordable dwelling unit program. There's a development going to come very close to where I live in Brambleton. And from what I understand, there is a good percentage of affordable dwelling units as part of the approval. So every county does it differently. Every jurisdiction has some version. That's one of the things I would love to work with groups like yours, where we can see from your studies and review, Brian, what works and what doesn't. Actually, say what doesn't work, what works better, okay, versus others. That way we know, okay, if this works better, then how do we collaborate with the local jurisdictions to say, can you amend, can you, tweak your program? Because there are many versions of it, and that's where I would focus my attention.
Great. Thank you all. And I see we have a question from Senator Marsden, who also I think is on camera now. Should there be a time limit on resolving affordable housing issues by local government? So, according to the Mercatus Institute, there appears to be at times a slow walking of projects that are controversial, perhaps in the hope that they will go away. And so then there were a couple other questions related to this. Um, financial incentives. I think we've been locked in this age-old conversation about the carrot or the stick. What carrots, what sticks, one or the other, both. So any insight into that issue?
Yeah, I'll say I agree that a shot clock is necessary. I'm to use a sports analogy, but I do think that one of the problems is yeah, and the default proceed, right? I mean, the default is right now. The default is when the clock runs out, the shot clock, the development doesn't get done, and the builder's out of luck, and so the locality there's no real incentive for them to come to a decision quickly. So I think depending on again what the comprehensive plan says and what the zoning ordinance says, but hey, if this development's allowed, right? I mean, and we know that it's going to be there, sort of similar to the guessing God's backyard problem. Like, yes, everybody agrees it's comprehensively planned for housing and for development. Why are we getting bogged down? But you treat it like a by right development. And so, yes, I am for putting some hard deadlines on localities to do this. Now they're going to come back and say it's an unfunded mandate, but again, a lot of these things are not really generally funded. They're funded through development fees and application fees and other things. Obviously, we want to minimize those, but I think that we can make that happen.
I believe big time on transparency, Brian, and that is one of the reasons why I'm working on this bill. I think transparency is the other avenue to throw the sunlight to say, okay, how long these things take and what are the root causes of the delays. So I agree, we can be in an approval process forever.
Great. Thank you all. How about efforts to eliminate the junk fees, such as upfront lease processing fees that are sometimes upwards of $100 to $200, which makes rent impossible?
Connie, you want to go first? I'll go first again. This is just the rhythm
Yeah,
we
of
got
course.
here.
That's fine.
But
Please.
yes, I mean we've passed some of those bills in the House before, and I think some of them vetoed by the governor. We've tried to bring some transparency to it, but it's a difficult thing to do. I mean, we've had this problem for years with homeowners associations. We tell them they can't charge up. You can charge up to $10 for this, and so they give it a new name, and they call it something else. And so, like, sort of naming the fees and putting a cap on them are hard. I think we ought to say this is all you can charge. And everything else is considered rent, and it needs to be disclosed as rent, and it needs to be built into that way and done that way. But yeah, junk fees are really frustrating. One of the things we've done is little things. We won't take a check. There's nowhere for you to drop off a check. You've got to go pay by electronic payment. and there's a $15 convenience fee for doing that. Like, wait a second, this is not convenient for me. It's convenient for you not to have somebody manage paper checks, and yet you're charging me for that. So we did say if you're not going to take a check, you've got to have at least one free way to pay the bill. And so we've done it in little pieces like that because some of the stuff is frankly outrageous, and I think we need to redouble our efforts on that front.
Thank you. I had a bill last year about debit card fees, where some landlords were charging $10, $15 for using a debit card, where literally the cash comes out of your checking account instantaneously. So again, to get Simon's point, everything has different ways of being charged with different names. The To me, it is cost of doing business by these operators, but then the fear is, will they charge it to the rent? But I agree, and I'm sure we'll be working on it again this upcoming session. As I said, I had a bill, it went to SEC, and it is still on my list to continue to work on.
You. So maybe looking at affordability from a different angle. What about minimum wage? Here's a question. Now I can't find it.
I think that's House Bill 1 and on our side. I mean, yes, to raise the minimum wage, certainly at least to $15 an hour. And again, by the time we catch up, inflation's sort of eating away at that as well. But yeah, I think that you'll see certainly I think both caucuses are committed to raising the minimum wage.
That's great.
Yes, sir. Yep.
And then the majority of older adults want to age in place, but resources to help lower resource people make their homes livable as they age are very limited. We know that, homelessness, one of the largest groups that are increasing in homelessness are older adults. And so how can we make the promise of aging in place real?
Delegate Simon, do you want to go first? Thank you. This is the accessory dwelling unit. That was one of the tools in the toolkit. And as I said, I learned a lot last year, 2024, in the House, working on that legislation. I'm committed to bringing it again. But again, I want to be, I repeat it again, I want to be collaborative with the local jurisdictions. I know some of them have some regulations, some don't, some outlaw it. And that is where we need to work together to make sure that we give more options for seniors to stay where they are and stay with their family. And also, it is also, I worked on a bill last year to increase the nursing home fees for the first time in several decades. So, I mean, there's a lot we can do, but the key thing is to make sure that we prioritize this, which I think both the caucuses are very committed to prioritizing this issue.
And also, I mean, making sure that we have funds for providing services to folks. Sometimes folks have paid off their homes, they get a tax abatement for their property taxes, so the taxes are sort of accruing for when they sell it. And it's not necessarily the cost of the housing, but it's like, what about transportation, right? How do I get from place to place? How do I get caregivers to my home? And a lot of times, our suburbs in Northern Virginia in particular, but even rural areas, they're built around the car, and the idea that you need to get into a car to do every act of living. And so I think it involves a multidisciplinary approach, right? It involves providing transportation options, providing in-home care, making sure that we have the infrastructure set up to provide the services folks need. So it's not just a housing problem.
Great. I am going through these. I think this is an interesting one. With the state looking at the potential to invest in a long-term solution to WMATA funding, What role does the General Assembly have in making sure those funds are used to support the maximum number of Virginians with appropriate land use near metro stations?
All right. So, I mean, it's yes. I mean, we have a role in that, right? I mean, we're investing in WMATA, and it's a state responsibility. Some of it's actually funded through transfer taxes on the sale of a home, too, which arguably raises the cost of housing. But at any rate, I think that we want to get a profitable investment from that. I think that creating more density around metro stations and making them more usable is going to increase ridership and actually will, decrease the need for subsidies, right? The cost of subsidizing. Obviously, Metro is never going to turn a profit. I just don't think there's a business model. And I don't think there's any transit system in the country that does it without some public assistance. But yeah, I think that, listen, to the extent Fairfax, Arlington, Alexandria, Loudoun, we're covering your WMATA contribution, we should also then have something to say about your land use decisions around those facilities, because we're putting the bill for it, but we need you guys to maximize the economic potential of those and also the usability and for constituents that need access to transit.
I fully agree. And I know, Brian, I have heard some discussions in Loudon about doing the same. So I think the jurisdictions understand the potential, agree that they need to work on that. And that is something that I look forward to working with NOAA jurisdictions to make sure that the investment, to Delegate Simon's point of view, that we're putting all this money in a business model that's not designed to make money, but how do we maximize? And that comes to land use and so on.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess staying on transportation, what are your thoughts on reducing parking mandates to reduce costs and increase flexibility for new housing?
Well, I'm in transportation in the Senate, so I'm learning as fast as much as I can. I think that we could see some ideas popping up on that, about not having minimums. So I'm pretty sure we'll see some action on that.
Yeah, this is one of those interesting ones where I talked about again the horseshoe comes around from the political spectrum, right? It's not a straight line, but it bends. And I'm supportive of not telling private landowners and developers what the market requires as far as parking goes. If you want to build an apartment building with one parking spot per unit, you're gonna have to sell that, right, to the people that want to buy your units or not. And if you think you can get more units out of it by not having to lower the cost by not having to have so many parking spaces, you're free to make that business decision. I think the idea that localities should sort of be micromanaging those kind of business decisions, as far as parking minimums go, or certain assumptions. Again, my daughter, who's 22 and she's about to finish graduate school, she's told me she wants to go live somewhere where she doesn't need to use her car every day, right? She wants to live somewhere like she doesn't desire the lifestyle that we've got, where she lived at the end of a cul-de-sac, which was nice and safe and bucolic in a lot of ways, but it meant getting into a car to run every single errand and so forth. She's like, I don't want that for myself. I don't see myself growing up that way. So, I think it's okay to be responsive to demographic changes, but right now, we've got local planners that are of a mind that, well, every household is going to eventually have 3 or 4 cars, and we need a place to park them so they don't spill over onto neighborhood streets. So that's where, again, the Mercatus guys and some of the housing advocates are in the same place. Hey, let the market dictate how many parking spaces you need. Why is this a role for local government? So we'll see. But I'm supportive of it in concept. It's another one of these, by the way, Dillon rule issues where sometimes localities are saying, please tell me I can't do this anymore, right? And it gives them, sometimes you want the state to sort of prevent you from being able to do things. It helps you resist the NIMBY stuff. And one other thing, I'm sorry, Brian, but that I forgot to mention in my opening before I have to jump off. Speaking of the NIMBYism, Josh Thomas has a bill he's going to be putting in the House to affect who has standing to challenge affordable housing projects, right? One of the ways that things get slowed down, and we've seen this in Arlington with Missing Middle and other places, is if it's a free-for-all, if anybody can claim any kind of impact from a housing development, they have standing to sue. That's not how it should be. There's a split. I don't want to get too wonky about this. There's an old legal doctrine about you have to have some actual direct effect to be able to have standing to sue over these things. So what we'd like to do is codify that, because I think the courts have started to creep away from that. But it's amazing how many really good ideas and projects and ordinances and things get bogged down in court. And again, this issue of slow rolling things and waiting them out until the developer runs out of money or goes away. That's a legal strategy that I think is being employed too often. We ought to make it so that's not you can't literally just keep somebody tied up in court until they run out of money and win, even if you don't have the merits behind your argument. So that's something that we'll be looking at as well.
Yeah, that's great to hear. We'll definitely reach out to Delegate Thomas and see if we can assist.
And then, Brian, just to close this out, the parking minimums can be a factor to limit housing. So I'm supportive of making sure that we address that, and I'm sure there will be some action on that decision.
Great. Since the Dillon rule was brought up, there was a question regarding Dillon rule. Specifically, can it be removed this year?
Again, that's one that sort of cuts both ways, right? And it's interesting because on the one hand, a lot of the legislative things we're talking about are limiting localities' independence to and mandating certain things, right? And that comes from the same concept that underlies the Dillon rule, right? Which is that ultimately the General Assembly tells you what powers you have and you don't have. So again, on something like parking minimums, without the Dillon rule, every locality can set up whatever parking minimums they want. They could do all kinds of things with the development process, and the state wouldn't have the authority to rein them in. And so be careful what you ask for. I know that there's some localities like, hey, listen, we've been trying for years to do more with affordable dwelling, and we've been told we can't because essentially the General Assembly has been controlled by folks that don't want us to put these kind of restrictions on them. So I know it's like, okay, now the pendulum swung the other way, and let's finally get rid of that stubborn Dillon rule. I think maybe a better approach would be let's use the Dillon rule to our advantage now that the political pendulum has swung the other way.
Yeah.
I defer to my senior and much more knowledgeable Delegate Simon on this. He's been in the General Assembly for a very long time, and I think he's absolutely correct. It can cut both ways.
No,
But I will emphasize, though, I think ultimately, like I said earlier, it's about collaboration. I think that's exactly what we need to focus on. And I've been repeating that in the Loudon Chamber meeting last week when we had a panel. It's that's what we should focus on, is how do we collaborate.
great. And so kind of circling back here quickly, I know we're getting close to time. Is around just kind of federal funding, particularly around permanent supportive housing, funding for people with disabilities. How do you think that the legislature may respond to this kind of to the growing need, but also the threat of significant cuts in federal funding for housing?
Why don't you go first on that one? I was distracted by Jeremy's
Oh,
having a
it's okay. I was just
sidebar conversation in the chat.
It's okay. It's okay. Thank you, Marcus. Carl, Brian, I would say it's going to be a challenge. We have a lot of other problems, obviously, to address, but it comes down to prioritization. It comes down to how creative we can get in solving this. You know, I mean, it's not going to be easy. You know, I just came back, as I said, from Radford after 2 days of the Senate Finance Committee meeting, and I'm sure I think the House had it a few days earlier. There are some headwinds coming. We know that. And I don't know, how we can change that. But what we can control is how we prioritize this, right? Obviously we care for these issues very dearly. The new administration coming in has prioritized affordability, housing affordability in particular. I'm sure they're going to have a great team working with the General Assembly. And what I would say, Brian, is that our commitment and our passion will come together, and we will have to prioritize and see specifically where the federal government is not going to do certain things and what we can do to fill that gap, to what extent.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't mean to be too negative about it. I just think we've all been sort of told after these briefings to go out and manage expectations about finances. So that's why you're hearing these cautionary sort of approach from both Colin and I. Yes, we want to help, but we're just concerned about what the fiscal picture is going to look like.
Great.
I mean,
Well,
Brian, if I may end this, I mean, housing is such a fundamental thing for the society, right? I mean, yes, we can focus all on healthcare. I'm just making an argument. But then if I don't have a house, if I don't have a roof over my head, we all know the social determinants of health also. So they are all connected. So it's not they're siloed. So it's going to be a challenge, but I think both the caucuses are very committed in making sure that we prioritize. And this is where working with groups like this is going to be critical. And I'll bring it back to all of us, is to prioritization, is to make sure that we meet often during session, is to make sure that we flag best practices.
yeah, indeed, indeed. Well, we are nearing the end. Thank you, both of you all, for sharing your insights with us. Greatly appreciated. Look forward to working with both of you all this upcoming session. I hope it goes well. I hope it goes by quickly for everyone involved. And I'm just going to kick it back to Jill to wrap us up.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Really, Delegate Simon, Senator Srinivasan, thank you. We're so lucky to have such great, committed, transparent elected officials who are willing to kind of jump on these calls and share your knowledge of this complicated topic. Can't thank enough our partners at Virginia Housing Alliance, Isabel and Brian. Thank you for joining us today. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank my own team, Hannah, for all of your work behind the scenes, and really a shout out to Amanda and Nika and Alice, who all really helped with outreach. Impressive show on a Thanksgiving week to have over 100 people here. So we just hope you continue to follow our work and use your voice to advocate for what's important. We have a lot of work cut out for us, of course, next year. And with the threats of federal cutbacks, we all kind of know what we're up against, or we're learning more and more each day. But more than anything, just want to wish you all a very happy Thanksgiving. We're grateful for all the partnership and look forward to staying in touch. So thank you again, everyone. Have a great day.